Who's here with us? Say hello in the chat as you come on in. Name, age, and where you're coming in from. I want to welcome in Coach Todd Bakari. Did I get it right? Bakari, man, I worked on it like 3 or 4 times before we went live, and then I got going. Sorry about that. Todd, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I've been watching everything throughout the week, and I'm just happy to be a part of this.
Thank you. We're happy to have you. These are some of my favorite, and I think some of the most impactful sessions when we start to talk about the mental game. We have a lot of sessions about the physical, how do you make saves and how do I hold my stick and what gear do I use? But these are some of the more important sessions, especially in this format. It's a great format to learn it. So I'm super pumped for what we got today. Before we get into that, if you're just joining, say hello in the chat. Let me know name, age, and where you're coming in from. Say hello to Todd. This is going to be great. Like I said, I want to make a couple announcements. One, I want to thank the sponsors. So let me bring up this little image that I have here, and I'm going to share my screen. Thank you to these sponsors. We have tons of gear that we're giving away, guys, and some of you have already won it. If you have won it, the team Lax Goalie Rat's going to reach out to you directly. Deny Goalkeeping, Coach John Knowles up in Rochester, New York, is a sponsor. We got Guardian Gear, makes the custom thumb splints, and I know some of you have already won a custom thumb splint. If you've ever had a thumb injury, you want to prevent thumb injuries, definitely hit up Guardian Gear. Lax Shield, protective device for the helmet. Tons of you have won those already. The CLAce, we just talked about that last session. That head's coming in July. I'm pumped for that one. I've got tons of Warrior Nemi QS heads and gloves. They really hooked it up. They gave me 6 of each, which is awesome. So we're giving away one of those each day. And then we're going to give away one at Brett Dobson's session whenever we get that one rescheduled. He's at the Worlds. We had to reschedule that one on Monday. East Coast Dyes is a sponsor. Thank you to them and the Impact Head. Nutty Buddy is a sponsor. We're giving away a cup setup every single day. And then String King is a sponsor. So thank you to those sponsors. How do you win? 3-step process to win or to get entered, I should say. Take a selfie of yourself watching this event, because you get to see me, you get to see Coach Todd. We do not get to see you, and we love to see you. It's awesome to see who's on the other end of this training. So take a selfie, step number 1. Step number 2, post that on social media and tag myself, and you can tag Coach Todd. We'll drop the Instagram links, the bios in the chat. That's step number 2, post. And then step number 3, just email help at laxgoalierat.com. Help at laxgoalierat.com. That'll get you entered. If you don't have social media, that's fine. Just email the actual photo itself. In step number 3, you can enter once per session. So you can enter 4 times per day. Okay. I think that's it. laxgoalierat.com/VIP if you want to pick up the VIP pass. Okay. You get free replays. Replay link will go out at the end of today. Free 24-hour replays. But if you want to get lifetime access, go back next week, next month, next year, rewatch some of these awesome coaching sessions like I do. I go back and rewatch these things all the time because they're just packed full of information, full of awesome details. Anyway, laxgoalierat.com/VIP. You can still get that. All right. Coach, let me welcome you back in. I think we're doing good. Who's fired up? Who's fired up in the chat? Let me see some fires. I'm like I said, mental health, mental game sessions are always some of my favorites. So at this point, Coach, I want to turn it over to you and let's get this party started.
All right, perfect. So let me just share my screen first before I jump right into it.
All right. I should mention, as we go through this, there's a Q&A box. So drop your questions in there. Ahmed already dropped in a question. You can only win once, right? Yes, that's right. You can only win one giveaway. So there you go. As we go through this, drop the questions in. We'll get to as many as we can at the end.
Okay, perfect. So let me know if you guys cannot see the screen, or if I'm on a certain slide and it's not matching what I'm saying. Just let me know, and then I can restart the sharing my screen option. All right. So are we good to go?
I think so. I could see it. You guys can see that. Let me know in the chat. I think we're good.
Okay. All right. Perfect. All right. So like you mentioned, today we're going to be talking about mental health and stress management. So mental health is a topic that is extremely important to me, not only because I'm a licensed therapist, but just because mental health had a huge impact on my family growing up. So just to give you guys a brief introduction of who I am, like you mentioned, my name is Todd Bukhari. I'm a licensed therapist here in the state of New Jersey. I work 100% with athletes when it comes to sports anxiety, but also when it comes to just mental health concerns and issues. So I work with athletes with issues they may have in their sport or issues they may have outside of their sport. Been working in the mental health field now for 10 years, believe it or not. I know I look young, but I'm 30 years. I'll be turning 30 in August. So I've been in this field for 10 years now. And I started working in group homes, psychiatric hospitals. At one point, I was a group counselor. And then now I transitioned into an individual therapist. So I've been in the field for some time, became licensed 3 years ago, started my practice a year and a half ago, and just kind of been trying to make an impact in the sports world. So if you guys have any questions about me at the end of the slide, I'm going to share my website, and you guys can reach out to me either by, sending a message through our website or email or phone, text message, whatever is easier for you guys. And I'll be able to respond to you as fast as possible once I get those questions. All right. So what the game plan is for today? Number one, I want to raise awareness on the topic of mental health. This is a topic that I feel like is very important for athletes, non-athletes to focus on. So I definitely want to bring awareness to this topic. I know over the past year or two, we've been hearing about mental health. We've seen athletes coming out talking about mental health. But today, I really want to bring this topic to the front of our minds. Okay. And today, we're really going to kind of focus on the athlete outside of the sport a little bit. Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit about stressors and things that athletes go through during their sport, during practice, during games. But today, I want you to kind of imagine you're taking the helmet off, and we're just focusing on the individual. Next, we're going to be talking about the difference between mental health and mental illness. And then lastly, we'll be covering different topics on how athletes need to prioritize their mental health, why you guys are more at risk than non-athletes, and then also how to manage stress. All right, so as I'm going through the presentation today, understand that some of this information may apply to you and may not. But if it does not apply to you, that doesn't mean jump off. That doesn't mean, just kind of like get distracted. Some of this information may be useful for a teammate you have, So if I'm talking about anxiety and you don't struggle with anxiety, I can guarantee there's at least one kid on your team that's struggling with anxiety, So information that you get from this conversation can be passed on to your teammates. If there's coaches on here, information that I talk about, it might not relate to your team, but it might relate to somebody you're training, somebody parents, same thing. So the information that I'm going to be sharing today is going to be universal, even if it doesn't fit you or doesn't have an impact on you.
It might even be good for your future self, right? Like you might not be going through these things now, but having these tools and knowing how to address it might be good for future Damon, right?
Exactly. Perfect. Yeah. And that's actually in one of my slides. So
okay.
Beat me to it. So
all right. Oh man, I jumped the gun. Sorry.
Nah, it's perfect. Yes. So when it comes to mental health, if I were to ask 10 different athletes what mental health is, I probably would get 10 different responses. So the response I like to give my athletes is that mental health refers to our thoughts, behaviors, and emotional well-being. All right. So if you guys are on this, take a picture of this screen, write it down, whatever the case may be. But understand that mental health refers to our thoughts, behavior, and emotional well-being. Okay. It's all about how we think, feel, and behave. So if you feel and you behave and act in a certain way, guess what? You have mental health. So it's important that we all understand that everybody has mental health. Myself, Coach Damien, your coaches at home, your parents, your family. I have a 10-month year, not 10-month year. I have a 10-month baby at home. Guess what? He has mental health, So once again, mental health refers to our thoughts, behaviors, and emotional well-being. So when it comes to mental illness is a little bit different. So now the definition when it comes to mental illness is that this is a condition that affects a person's thinking, mood, or behavior for a period of time and affects your ability to function. So the key thing in this sentence is for a period of time and then also affects your ability to function. So for example, if I'm struggling with anxiety or if I'm feeling anxious for 1 or 2 days, but I'm still able to fully function and do everything that I normally do, then that's okay. I'm just showing signs of anxiety. But if it gets to the point where I'm struggling with anxiety for a long period of time, let's say for 4 to 5 weeks, my anxiety is at 10 and I can't function and I can't go to work. I can't go to school. I can't jump on presentations like this because I'm just having excessive worry about whatever the case may be. That's when it can kind of develop into a mental illness. So when something is happening for a long period of time and it affects your daily functioning. You know, if you don't want to eat anymore, you can't sleep anymore, you don't want to practice your hygiene, you don't want to take a shower, you don't want to brush your teeth, things along those lines, that's when it turns into a mental illness. So some common mental illness that I see in athletes that I work with, excuse me, and then also athletes that I see talking about mental health, it are anxiety disorders, depression, eating disorders, adjustment disorders, and schizophrenia, and much more. So these are only the top 5 that I've seen over the past, I'll say over the past like 6 to 8 months. Um, Also, an easy way to remember the difference between mental health and mental illness. So, number one, mental health, like I mentioned, it's your general state, your general well-being and state of mind. Mental illness is when something disrupts your mental state. It disrupts how you feel, how you act, how you think, and how you behave. All right. All right, perfect. And I know I'm running through this, so if you guys have any questions, just put it in the chat, and then I'll try to get to it before the end of tonight. Or if not, like I said, just reach out to me via email, and then I'll get back to any questions you may have. So now, when it comes to mental illness, it doesn't just come out. It doesn't, for the most part, it doesn't just happen out of anywhere. You know, there's sometimes key factors that leads to an individual struggling with their mental health. So, for example, your environment. If you're in an environment that causes high anxiety, you always have to watch over your back. You always have to worry about your safety, your protection, the protection of your family when you're not there. That can cause, you know, a mental illness. Grief, the sudden loss, losing a loved one, losing a teammate, you know, losing a coach. You know, when somebody passes away, we're not able to process that grieving moment, then it can turn into a mental illness. It can turn into a deep, dark depression. It can turn into anxiety. It can turn into many different things. Social isolation. I'm pretty sure that at least 90% of the people in here can relate to this during COVID. You know, during COVID, when we were away from our sport, away from school, away from our friends, away from work, we were stuck in the house. You know, that brought out a lot of issues that we probably did not know was happening, you know, because what I find is a lot of my athletes that I work with, they use their sport to kind of manage their mental health. You know, they use their sport like when they're feeling stressed out, instead of talking to somebody, they're going to practice. You know, they're taking it out on somebody on their team. They're somehow using their sport to cope with different stressors they have going on. But when COVID happened, I think that was 2 3 years ago. Yeah, 3 years ago, excuse me, when you no longer had that outlet of using your sport to deal with stressors and deal with anxiety or deal with whatever you had going on, a lot of issues came to surface. On top of that, unresolved trauma. You know, I work with a lot of individuals that have trauma that took place years ago, that took place when they were a child, that took place when, you know, like 5 10 years ago, and they just kind of left it in the past. And a lot of us have the mindset of, you know, if I just leave it in the past, then I'm good. You know, if I don't think about it, then I'm okay. But sometimes unresolved trauma can lead to different mental health issues. The biggest one, number 5, is genetics, your family history. So now, when I learned this in grad school, it really stood out because at first I didn't understand it, but once my professor kind of broke it down for me, it really showed me the importance of having that conversation with my family about mental health. So, for example, in this diagram, you may see up top here is the grandparents. The second row are your parents, and then the third line is your parents' children. So, for example, if my grandmother struggled with depression and my dad struggled with depression, the chances of me and my siblings struggling with that disorder are much higher than somebody who does not have that disorder in their family. So it's important to understand that if your grandparents and your parents and your uncles and your aunts are struggling with different mental health issues, that doesn't mean you're going to struggle with it as well, but that means that you have a higher chance. So now the reason why this was so important to me is because in my family, schizophrenia runs in my family on my dad's side, and schizophrenia is one of the more chronic mental health disorders. So I found out that my grandfather on my dad's side was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and then my dad was diagnosed with schizophrenia as well when he was about 30 years old. So when I learned this in class, what it made me do, number one, I did get a little scared. I was a little nervous, but it forced me to kind of do more research on what is schizophrenia and what causes it. And the main thing that I found is high amount of stress. So once I found this information out, I told myself that I need to manage my stress. I need to know when to take a break. And we're going to talk a little bit more about stress down the line. But once I found this out, that schizophrenia runs in my family, I had to change my entire mental diet. You know, I had to change how I view mental health. I had to change how I deal with stress, deal with anxiety, deal with, you know, bad days and good days. You know, so it's important for you to understand what runs in your family. And then next, the increase in daily stressors. So stress is something that we all go through, athletes and non-athletes. But something I find when it comes to athletes that I work with, and even younger athletes as well, that there's a list of different things that you guys have to face, different things that you go through throughout the year and also throughout the off season. So if you guys know of a different stressor that you're facing or somebody else is facing, throw it in the chat. Put it in the chat because I know for a fact I didn't hit everything. So if you guys can think of anything that's not already on this list, just throw it in there. But the ones I have is pressure from teammates and coaches, especially for you goalies. Like it's crazy because if somebody else makes a mistake, it might go unseen. Somebody might miss it or somebody might not pay attention to it. But when it comes to a goalie, if you make a mistake, everybody's going to see it. When you make a mistake, most of the time, that means the other team just scored a point. So just the fact of you have a lot of pressure from your teammates and coaches to be excellent, to be perfect, or to be as close as perfect as possible can add stress. Sometimes we set high expectations. We set expectations to be perfect. And then when we don't reach it, that can lead to a high amount of stress. Also, overtraining with no balance. Like it's important for us to understand that we should train, we should work out, we should learn how to get better in our sport, but we need to create that balance to where we know when to stop and we know when to invest into ourselves. Also, sleep deprivation, not getting enough sleep or getting too much sleep, a balance of school and team responsibilities. I know it's summer break now, which is awesome, but like during the school year, having school, having tests, having exams, having projects, and then on top of that, having to go to practice and being able to perform at a high level can add to stress. Injuries and also trying to recover from injuries, so none of us want to get hurt and we can't predict when we get hurt, but when it happens, that takes us away from the sport. And when we're no longer playing, then we can have the potential of losing our position, or maybe our team isn't as good when we're not out there on the field. So just having the pressure of trying to hurry up and get back to our sport can add stress. Personal issues outside of sport, things happening with the family, parents getting divorced, losing a loved one, financial problems, just different stressors that are happening off of the field can also play a factor on the field. Number 8 kind of goes with number 2 as well, additional pressure on self to succeed. We all want to play at the best level that we can. Some of us want to play in college, some of us want to make it to the next level. So sometimes we just put a lot of pressure on ourselves and a lot of stress on ourselves to kind of perform at a level to where we can get to that next point. Also, a lot of athletes are more focused on their physical health. We pay attention to nutrition, we pay attention to working out, to exercising, gaining speed. And sometimes we neglect and forget that we need to invest into our mental health. So that can lead to a high amount of stress. Peer pressure, social media. For those who are active on social media, I know a lot of kids now post their scholarships on social media. They post their highlights on social media. So back when I played sports, sounds like a long time ago, but the last time I played a sport was 2011. But social media wasn't that big. I think the biggest thing was like MySpace at that time. So nobody was posting their highlights. Nobody was posting, hey, I got a scholarship here. So you didn't have like the pressure of like, wow, like all these kids are posting all these good opportunities they're getting and I'm not, so just seeing other people succeeding and you're maybe not at that level yet can add additional stress to you. And then also family pressure. Sometimes our parents put a lot of stress on us to perform well, to be excellent, to make it to the next level. And sometimes they're doing it out of love and they don't notice what they're doing. Or sometimes parents kind of project their wishes onto their children when it comes to sports, and that can lead to a high amount of stress. All right. Once again, if I missed anything, if you guys can think of anything, just throw it in the chat and you guys can discuss that.
We got a couple come through in the chat in terms of like the coaches could stress you out. One you mentioned putting pressure on yourself. One, Alexis, a young goalie, said, well, the coach is actually putting pressure on me. He said he wants me to save the ball at a certain percent, kind of like holding them to a certain standard so that she feels a little bit of pressure in that, or a little bit of stress in that.
Definitely. I can imagine coaches, trainers, everybody, So yeah, that's a great one. I'm pretty sure a lot of other athletes on here can agree with that and can relate to that. So when it comes to dealing and managing your stress, I want you guys to understand, like what I'm about to share with you is not going to fit for everybody. Mental health, when I'm working with clients, it's not like a one answer fits everybody. It's different for every athlete depending on your own mental makeup. Okay. But this is kind of the general answer I give people when they ask me, well, how do I manage the stress that I'm getting from different factors? So number one is you have to understand and learn what your triggers are. You have to learn what's making you feel stressed, what's making you feel anxious, what's making you feel down, feeling overwhelmed. You have to be able to identify that. So if you can list it out, okay, these 5 things are making me feel stressed, then you're off to a great start. Okay. Because then next, you have to be honest with yourself. As you're creating that list, you have to be honest with yourself and ask, like, okay, when do I feel the most amount of stress? Is it in practice? Is it at school? Is it when I'm coming home from a game with my parents? You have to be honest with yourself and really listen and ask yourself, when do I feel the most stress throughout the day or when it comes to my sport? Then once you find that answer, next you will have to kind of take a break, learn when to take a break and unwind. An example that I use with a lot of my younger athletes, I'm not too sure what the ages are on here, is so back in the day when I played Xbox, I had an Xbox 360. I don't even know if they make those anymore. But when I played my Xbox for a long period of time, what happens is I get the 3 rings of death, what we used to call it. That's when the game overheats and I can't play the game anymore. So I don't know if anybody can relate to that on here, but when I'm playing the game for a long period of time, it overheats and I have to stop. So what I have to do is take the game off, go find something else to do, wait a few hours, and then I can come back and play. In that moment, I'm taking a break from the game and I'm letting the Xbox cool down and not overheat. And it's the same thing when it comes to our mind. We need to know when we need to take a break and step back. When do we need to take a break from those things on that list that are stressing us out? When do we need to take a break from training? When do we need to take a break from working out, from watching a film? And we have to be honest with ourselves when that time comes, and we have to legit be disciplined and do it when that moment comes. Another option also is to create a self-care list. Create a list of things that you can do that is 100% for you, the human being, not the athlete. So for example, on my self-care list is I love getting massages. I love going for nature walks. I love going for nature runs. I just did a 10-mile run. I think it was a month ago. The broadsheet here in Philadelphia just did that, and the people were like, "That's crazy," but for me, that's self-care. When I'm running, I can only think about me. I can only think about one thing in that moment. So you want to find different things that you can add to your self-care list to where it's just about you. Some people, it's getting a haircut. Some people, it's taking a nap, which I'm probably going to do within the next hour or two. Just find what can go on your self-care list that you can invest into yourself and it's away from the sport. Next, find a trusted individual that you can talk to. For my athletes, before I start therapy sessions with them, I make them give me at least 3 to 5 people that they trust that they can talk to when certain things happen. So rather it be a parent, a coach, a teacher, a trainer, just find that individual who you can talk to. Therefore, when you identify that your trigger is going off and something's happening, you can contact this individual and talk to them, and they can cool you down or give you advice when needed. And then next, the biggest one I think is also create a balance between sports and life. Sometimes we invest too much into our sport and we forget that we have to take care of ourselves as well. And a lot of athletes that do this throughout their career are the ones that struggle the most when they're done playing their sport because they put their all, they put their focus into just the sport, but then they completely forget to invest into themselves. So now when they're out of the sport, they feel like they're on a complete different island and they don't know which direction to go. So it's important now that you're young that you learn how to invest time into your sport, but then also into yourself as well. All right. So this leads me to a question that obviously you guys can't answer because we're not, having an interaction, having a conversation. But the main reason why athletes suffer in silence is because of the negative perception when it comes to mental health. The stigma when it comes to mental health. A lot of individuals are taught at a young age to man up. Don't show signs when you're feeling anxiety, when you're feeling depressed. Don't show that. Don't show sadness. Don't show any worry. You have to be strong. When you're feeling down, you have to be strong and fight through it. If you do this, people are going to think you're weak. So mask it. Suppress your issues. So it's important for us to understand that this is a leading reason why athletes rather struggle in silence and talk out. But we need to find a way to break this stigma. We need to understand that if you talk about your issues, that does not make you weak. If you notice something is wrong and you're trying to figure out how to fix it, that does not make you weak. That actually makes you strong. But if you don't talk about it and you suppress it and you hold on to it to yourself, then what's going to happen is that issue is just going to grow and affect you in different ways. So when it comes to mental health and mental illness, it's important for you to know the signs, you know? So with mental health issues and mental illness, we have to understand that it's invisible, you know? So when it comes to sports, if I'm running down the field and my pinky's pointing in the wrong direction, it's obvious that my finger's broken, you know? If my shoulder is hanging down to my ankle, then it's obvious that my shoulder is dislocated. But when it comes to mental health challenges, sometimes we can't really see it unless we pay attention to it. All right. So I want to add this. If you guys see anything that I can add to this list, just let me know. But I want to share with you guys important signs that you guys should look for in yourself, but then also teammates. All right. So number one, becoming less talkative. You know, if you're noticing that yourself or a teammate is not talking as much as they usually do, you know, check in with them. Number two, sleeping or eating changes. Eating more or eating less, as I mentioned before. Feeling sad and low, feeling sad and low daily, and you don't know why, you know. And this is important because, for example, if you're in a championship game and you lose and you're feeling low for about, you know, a few days or a few weeks, that's completely normal. You know, if you lost somebody and you're feeling down for a few days after that, that's completely normal. But when it's to the point where you're feeling down for a few weeks and you can't really pinpoint why you're feeling down, but you just feel this dark cloud over you, that's when, you know, you have to pay attention to that sign and talk to one of those trusted individuals that I just mentioned in the last slide. Another sign is also panic or high amount of anxiety that you can't control. On top of that, excessive worry of fear that something is going to happen to you or happen to somebody around you. Feeling a high change in emotions daily. You know, one day you're feeling a high amount of energy. You know, you're cleaning the entire house, you're getting all your schoolwork done, you're outside working out, you're doing multiple things, but then the next day it's a complete different person. You know, you're feeling down, you're feeling depressed. You don't want to get out of bed, you don't want to get out of the room, you want to keep the room dark and closed. You know, that's something to pay attention to. Also, loss of interest in loss of interest in normal activities. So obviously, if you love playing your sport, but then all of a sudden, you know, you just kind of want to distance yourself from that. That's a sign. Where if you know you love playing video games, love playing with your friends, love doing whatever. But once you notice that a loss of interest in a certain activity that you always do happens randomly, then that's something to pay attention to. Becoming more angered or irritable, thinking about suicide, which is a conversation that we all need to be having with ourselves, with our teammates, with our families. Loss of motivation, isolation, like I mentioned earlier, around COVID time, a large amount of stress, and also inability to carry out daily activities. All right. So I know there's probably some athletes on here thinking like these are like different feelings and behaviors that happen daily, you know, and that's probably because, you know, you guys are faced with a high amount of stress. But it's important that you're not just making this the norm, you know, that, hey, I'm an athlete, I'm dealing with school, I'm dealing with my sport, I'm dealing with pressures from my coaches. So I'm supposed to feel this way. I want you to understand that you're not, you know, I want you guys to notice, I want you guys to take notice of these signs and talk to those trusted individuals when you notice it. Okay. Do not let this list become the normal life for you. All right. Moving on. So, which brings me to my next point. How can we maintain a positive mental health? So number one, it's always to become more aware. We have to know what's going on. You know, we have to be aware that, okay, I'm struggling with these different signs that I just mentioned. You know, I'm struggling in this area. I'm not feeling okay. Something feels off. So we have to become aware. And like I mentioned before, we have to be honest with ourselves. You know, don't have that man up mindset. Don't have that tough up, like, you know, I need to be tougher or I need to fight through this. We need to find ways to be honest with ourselves and identify any possible stresses we're facing. Number two, we have to learn our family mental health history. You know, have that conversation with your mom, with your grandparents, or with any adult in your family that you trust. Have that conversation with them and ask them, you know, a tough question like, hey, mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, does it mental health issues? Does mental illness run in our family? If so, what? And when you find that information out, it might be scary or it might be new to you. Just do some research on it. You know, just do some research on it and learn. Okay. So if the anxiety is something that we struggle with in our family, what has anybody done to try to break that cycle? Number three, develop healthy sleeping patterns and eating patterns. You know, not sleeping too much, but sleeping just right. And the same when it comes to our eating patterns. Number four, practice mindfulness or meditation techniques daily. This is something that I'm trying to get into as well. Just trying to learn how to be in the current moment, you know, not thinking too much about past events, not thinking too much about future events, just being in the moment, you know. And sometimes when we notice that our anxiety is increasing, if we can practice these mindfulness techniques, in that moment, it kind of brings us back to the current moment right then and there. So we're no longer thinking about what we're worrying about in the future. We're just kind of focused on what's happening in that moment. Next, increase the use of positive self-care. As I mentioned before, create that list of things that you can do to invest into yourself. Number six, another big one, ask for help when needed. It's the same thing with sports. If you're struggling in an area, let's say you're struggling with speed, you're going to find somebody, you're going to find a trainer that can help you develop your speed. You're going to find somebody that can help you develop whatever you're struggling in. So when it comes to mental health, it's the same exact mindset we have to have. We have to understand that if I notice that I'm struggling in an area, I should try to seek help. Number seven, my favorite one, mainly because I'm a therapist, but try therapy, try to find the right therapist for you. So now therapy is very tricky. I know a lot of people say therapy isn't for me, or I tried therapy and it didn't work. But we have to understand that therapy, there's so many different forms of therapy. You can find a therapist that specializes in anxiety, that specializes in working with athletes that struggle with depression, with family trauma, whatever the case may be. But you have to do the research before you get to therapy. So for example, I started therapy myself. As a therapist, I started therapy as a client myself earlier this year. And to be honest, in the beginning, it was a little bit different. It was a little bit challenging in the beginning. And I definitely had to have a few conversations with my therapist to let him know what I needed and what I didn't need it. But we finally got onto a good track. We finally got onto a good path to where I feel like he can assist me in different areas that I have concern in. So trying therapy allows you to see things from different point of view, and it also gives you new information that you can use to help you with whatever issues you're struggling with. um Number eight, you want to address the issue instead of suppressing it. Like I mentioned before, a lot of us athletes think that we just need to put our issues under the carpet. We just need to ignore it. If we don't think about it, it's going to go away. And using that mindset of just like not thinking about it or not talking about it right now is almost like putting a band-aid over a deep cut. It might look good because you can't see the cut in that moment, but eventually that band-aid is going to come off and you're going to see that bruise. And the longer you wait is the worse that bruise gets. So when you notice there's an issue, address it there in the moment or address it around that time instead of trying to cover it up with a band-aid. And then next, weekly or daily self-assessments. This is something that I started with my clients as well. Checking in with yourself. Sometimes we go days without asking ourselves, how are we doing? Something I also noticed is that if I were to meet you guys and I say, hey, how's everything going? 9 times out of 10, everybody says good. Everything's fine. Everything's cool. But we really don't sit there and ask ourselves, like, wait, how do I feel right now? How am I today? Am I feeling good? On a scale of 1 to 10, am I really at a 10, or am I just saying that because it sounds good? So we need to check in with ourselves weekly. Some people weekly, some individuals daily. And I want to show an example that I have. So this is what I share with my athletes when it comes to checking in. I'll share this with my clients and I'll ask, where are you at on this scale? Are you in the green? Are you in the yellow? Are you in the orange or red? And this allows them to really sit down and think like, okay, I said I'm doing good, but am I really? And sometimes I have athletes say, honestly, this morning I woke up, I was in the red, and I was in the red because of X, Y, and Z. But then after that, I was able to practice certain skills and techniques we talked about. So now I'm kind of in the yellow. But it allows you to really dissect how you're feeling instead of just saying those general responses of, yeah, I'm good, I'm fine, everything's okay. And it allows us to really check in with ourselves. All right. And also with this, you have to be honest with yourself. You can't just lie to yourself and say, I'm feeling okay, I'm feeling good. Because at the end of the day, the only person who you're really hurting is yourself. All right. So when it comes to athletes, and this is kind of just from my point of view, I think three things that athletes need to work on daily to be the best version of themselves is, I'm sorry, where is it? There we go. Is you need to work on your body, your physical health. You need to pay attention to what you're eating. You need to pay attention to, here we go, to what you eat, staying hydrated, relaxing, recovering after a workout, recovering after a hard training session. You need to exercise and train and stretch, excuse me. And then also athletes can work on their craft as well, which is working with a trainer, working with a coach, working with a position specific coach to improve your skills at whatever area you need to. You need to lift weights, watch film. But then I feel like a lot of athletes skip this last one and we forget about it. And it's the mental side, it's the mental side when it comes to being an athlete. And a lot of the examples I have here are kind of more focused to mental health out of the sport, but I'm sure we all can create a list of different ways that we can improve the mental side of being a better athlete. So, for example, that I have on here is working with a therapist that specializes working with athletes, or maybe just a regular therapist who knows nothing about sports, but they're just a good fit for you. So working with somebody that can help you reduce any stressors or any triggers that you're facing. Learn when to take a break and unwind, like I mentioned before, and then also learn how to monitor and reframe negative thoughts. Okay, we all have negative thoughts after a bad performance, after something goes wrong, but we need to learn different techniques on how we can reframe those thoughts and make it more productive to help us reach our goals. All right. So I definitely find that a lot of athletes spend countless of hours working on their body and craft. But when it comes to the mental side, it gets neglected. And actually, I want you guys to take some time right now and throw in the chat. How much time a week do you invest into your body, into your physical health? How much time a week do you invest into your craft? And then how much time do you invest into the mental side? How much time are you investing into your mental health? And see if the numbers are the same. See if the numbers are the same or see if it's higher when it comes to body and craft.
Throw it in the chat, guys. I'd love to see that as well. It's so interesting. I think a lot of you have heard that, the goalie position is mostly mental, right? I mean, there's a lot of percentages that get thrown out. Maybe it's 75% mental. Maybe it's 50% mental. Maybe it's 90% mental. And yet, like when you look at some of these responses, like I spend 30 minutes on the mind, right? Or some of people put 0. I spent 0 on the mind, and if the mental game really is that important and you're training it 0% of the time, there's a big discrepancy there, right?
Exactly. So if that's the area that you're struggling in, find somebody in your area. It might be a coach, it might be a parent. Find somebody that specializes in that area and learn. Okay, how can I invest more time into the mental side of this game? A lot of research. There's a lot of videos on YouTube, a lot of articles being put out there now on different like mental strength techniques and skills and drills that you can do. But we need to start investing more time into the mental side of the game, but then also our mental health as well. Excuse me. So, as we're about to wrap up, I want to mention that success does not make you immune from mental health challenges. And what I mean by that is a lot of athletes feel like, okay, I'm struggling right now, but that's because I'm not doing good in my sport. Once I get that scholarship, I'll be good. Once I start getting those offers, I'll be good. Once I become the starter, I'll be fine. Once I make it to the next level, I'll be fine. But I'm sorry to be the one to say that that's not always true. Success doesn't eliminate our mental health challenges, so we have to understand that regardless if we're being successful, we're doing good in our sport or not, we need to understand that we are not immune to mental health challenges and we need to focus on that as well. So when it comes to the statistics, 1 in 5 individuals struggle with their mental health or may live with a mental illness. But when it comes to athletes, it's 1 in 4. So that means when you look at your team, if you pick 4 random kids on your team, at least one of them are struggling with some type of mental illness. And it may not be something severe. It might just be sports anxiety, or it might be depression, or it might be eating disorder, whatever the case may be. But at least 1 out of every 4 athletes on your team, somebody is struggling with their mental health. Now, the question is, are they talking about it or are they suppressing it? Are they addressing those issues or are they holding it in because they made it the new norm? Are they holding it in because they don't even know that I'm struggling right now? So last but not least, I want to leave you guys with these closing quotes. All right. So after today, like I said, if the information doesn't apply to you, that's completely fine. But what I want you to do is I want you to check on those strong teammates. I want you to check on the confident teammate. I want you to check on that quiet teammate. I want you to check on those athletes that are always smiling. Okay. Because like I mentioned before, mental health challenges can be invisible, and somebody may seem like everything is perfect, but then behind closed doors is a complete different conversation, So I want you to make sure that you understand that athletes may appear like everything's okay, but maybe struggling on the inside. And sometimes people are waiting for somebody just to really check in with them, not ask me, hey, how are you doing? Good. All right, cool. But really ask like, hey, how are you feeling? Good. Okay. Why? What's making you feel good? Or on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you at? So we need to have these conversations with our athletes, coaches. We need to have these conversations with our players, teammates, whatever the case may be, but we need to continue to have that conversation about mental health with everybody around us. All right. So like I mentioned before, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to either give me a call or shoot me a text. or you can reach us on Instagram or on our website. We have more information on our website, like different resources, different things you can read when it comes to mental health. So check it out. And if you guys have any questions, man, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and let us know. All
Awesome.
right.
Well,
So
thank you so much, Coach. David Laxcoley, our intern working behind the scenes. If you could drop all of those, the Instagram link and the website link and the phone number into the chat, that would be awesome. What'd you guys think in the chat? Let me know. Let me know. We got time for questions, but I thought that was great. Like I said, it's such an important topic and a lot of cool lessons in there. I hope you guys screenshot the some of those slides
yeah.
along the way. So,
And also,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And I'll have a few handouts as well that I'll share with you, and you can pass it on to the athletes, to the parents, to the coaches as well. And it's going to highlight some of the information I talked about tonight as well.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much. If you could go back just one slide, the first question I have is you kind of hit on it a little bit, but if some athletes, we're so trained when someone says, "Hey, how's it going?" Fine. Right. Like that question doesn't really doesn't get underneath the surface issue because it's sort of a surface level type of response. How do I check in on these teammates? What should I say? Like, how do I really get to that deeper level, if that makes sense?
That's a great question. So it really depends on your relationship with that teammate. A lot of my friends know that I'm the one to ask questions, and that's before I was a therapist. So I'll be the one to go to my friends and be like, "Hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you at right now?" Like on a scale of 1 to 10, like how did you feel after that last class, or how did you feel after that game? And that kind of forces the individual to really think like, okay, 10 being perfect, 1 being not the opposite of perfect. I was at like a 3. Whatever number they give you, then you ask why. Like, why were you at a 3? And then they might say, because I had a terrible game. I wasn't focused. I wasn't locked in. And then you can ask them after that, okay, well, what do you think you need to do to get from a 3 to a 10? Or what do you need to do to increase on that scale? So that's a technique that I love using now, mainly because I'm kind of like trained in it, but also I was using that before I even knew that it was a scaling question. On top of that, instead of asking somebody, how are you doing? Just ask them, hey, like, what are some good things that happened today? What are some not so good things that happened today? Being a little bit more specific with our questions to make them really think about a response. Because if I ask a general closed question, hey, how was your day? They might just give you a one-worded answer. So ask questions that are going to force them to answer the question with a more open response.
Oh, I love that. That's great. That's great. And I love this slide right here so much because one of the things I wrote down is from this presentation is the physical injuries you can see, right? When you got a big bruise, or you got a sprained ankle, or heaven forbid, a broken thumb or a broken arm or a broken bone, you see that, right? You see that. But the mental health injuries, quote unquote, or mental health issues, you don't see. And so checking in on those strong teammates, confident, quiet team, anyone really check it on your entire team, right? But it's so important. I love that.
Thank you. Definitely.
All right, so we got a couple questions. If you want to go to the next slide, just so your contact info's up while we answer these questions. How do you help with the frustration after we make a bad pass or we let an easy goal? So let's say you make a bad play, right? You make a bad play. And sometimes you can get really frustrated. You're like, oh man, I should have had that. And maybe you hear someone chirp at you from the sideline. What advice do you give to youth athletes to help manage that frustration from a bad play?
So that's actually a great question. I'm actually working with a client on that right now, to the point where it's a different sport, but it's to the point where whenever he makes a mistake, it's like, fire is raining, he gets super upset. Almost like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with basketball, but almost like the Draymond Green effect, to where like he's just really showing his emotions on his sleeves. So number one, it really depends on the situation, but I like to check in with athletes to see what are their expectations, like what are your expectations for the game? And a lot of the time, athletes have expectations that are all result based. And when they're not reaching those results, they get really upset. They either get upset or they get down on themselves. So I like to kind of reframe the expectations they may have in the game. So if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. If you make a mistake, you can focus on how you can respond to it. So there's different techniques that I will work with an individual as far as just learning how to reframe certain thinking to negative responses, or to negative outcomes, such as missing the ball or such as somebody scoring on you. But it's just different things you have to focus on and compare it to just reacting to what's happening in that moment.
That's a great point, right? Like the question came from Andrea. So Andrew, what's your expectation? Is your expectation that you're not going to give up any goals? Right? Because that does not happen. How many people have had a shutout? Maybe like one or two goalies on this chat have had a shutout. That just does not happen. Right. So, having a different focus and focusing on things that you can control, like your attitude and right. And things of that nature, right, are kind of better reactors than getting frustrated.
Definitely, yeah. So, and that also doesn't mean to expect to let up 5 goals every game, but just understand that that's a part of the game. That's a part of your position, And a lot of young athletes, I'm not too sure how how old this individual is, but a lot of us feel like we have to be perfect in order to have a good game, in order to have in order to have a perfect game, and that's not always true. You can let 1 goal and that be it the entire game. So and that's still in my opinion, that's still a good outcome. So we have to really pay attention to how we respond to these negative outcomes instead of reacting to it. Because if you react to letting a goal up, then that might lead to 3 more goals because you're no longer focused on the
Exactly.
true, which is to play as best as you can.
Exactly. Todd, I know you're new to the sport of lacrosse. Giving up 5 goals would still be a great game. It's a really high scoring. It's a high scoring sport. I mean, I've given up 15, 20 goals in a game. So there you go. All right. Question from Peyton: should we be playing if we're so should we be playing if we're so stressed we're crying on the field and trying to hide it from our team and coaches? So interesting question. Like, at what point would you say, like, the mental health issues kind of so bad, like I probably shouldn't play?
Once it starts affecting the way you play, if you're a certain type of player and you start to notice that the stress and pressure or whatever's going on is affecting the way you play, that's when I think you need to talk to that trusted individual, rather be your coach, teammate, parent, trainer, or finding a therapist. That's when you need to talk to that individual when you start to notice that it's a decline in your performance, and not just one game, but if it's happening consistently, then that's when you need to talk to somebody to kind of either get that pressure off your shoulders or learn how to respond and react to that to the pressures you're facing. So I would say if it happens one time, okay, then maybe have that conversation with somebody. Maybe it was just like a rough week. Maybe you lost somebody, or maybe something was going on at home. But if it's continuing to keep happening, then that's when I feel like you need to reach out when it's affecting your performance on a continuous line of events.
Basis. Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. And if you have a backup goalie, I mean, that could be like real easy, right? Like, hey, can you take this one? Like, I'm not feeling right mentally. It gets a little trickier if you're at a tournament all day and you're the only goalie on the team, right? And how do we attempt to deal with that? I don't know.
Yeah. Like if you're the only goalie on the team,
Yeah.
that's when it comes to the mental preparation before the game.
Okay.
I saw the quote, and I'm definitely gonna mess it up. It was along the lines of all the preparation you're doing for the game happens before the game. When you get into the game, you can no longer prepare for that moment because you already did all the work prior to that. So if you know you don't have a backup goalie and you kind of struggle in the mental side, you need to prepare and invest more than 30 minutes, invest more than 10 minutes, and you need to invest and be prepared for that moment prior to the game. So all the work happens before that whistle is blown at the start of the game.
Yeah. Love it. Question about, this is kind of a younger audience, so this might not apply to a lot, but once you get into that high school, maybe college age, drugs and alcohol come into play, right? And can you talk a little bit about how those might impact mental health?
Oh, definitely. Substance abuse is huge. A lot of athletes, excuse me, may use substance just to deal with different stressors. Instead of me talking about it, I'd rather smoke marijuana. Instead of me talking about it, I'd rather go out and drink and have fun with my friends. And to be honest, from my perspective and research, it shows that when you drink, it might help you in the moment, but it's only making the issue worse. It's only making the issue 10 times bigger. So, like you mentioned, in the high school level, and especially college and professional level, a lot of athletes would rather use those substances instead of actually talking to somebody, instead of actually doing the real work and figuring out what's going on, having those tough and hard conversations and getting to the core of it and rebuilding themselves from the core. A lot of athletes kind of would rather shy away from that and use substances such as marijuana, alcohol, and other things, and tobacco, whatever the case may be. So you definitely see that more at a higher level. And that's mainly because the stress that they're dealing with at a higher level is much higher. In college now, the NIL deals. So some athletes now are kind of providing for their families back home. So it's like if I play bad, then now my family back home can't eat. So now like I'm dealing with all this stress and I can't manage it. Instead of me talking to somebody about it, I'd rather, use a substance that's gonna make me feel good for the moment and it might make me forget about the issue that I'm facing.
The easy way out, right? Easy
Correct.
way
Yeah.
out. What's the difference between mental disorders and neurological disorders? I've been told neurological disorders run in my family, and I don't know if I can get it yet or if I'm good because I don't have it now.
Okay. Repeat that one more time. You
Yeah,
went in and out.
mental disorders versus neurological disorders was the question. We talked about how the mental health issues run in the family. I don't know what a neurological disorder is.
Mhm.
I don't know.
I don't specialize in that area, but
Okay.
that's kind of I believe now I'm gonna do research after this, but that's more of like autism, something that you're
Mm,
born. So if that runs in your family with autism, you'll know that at birth, Down
mhm.
syndrome, you'll know that at birth, So if it runs in your family, that just kind of means that if you have, I don't know how old this individual is, but that means if you have a child that they may struggle with autism, they might be diagnosed with autism. So that just means it's something that happens at birth compared to anxiety or PTSD. That's something that can develop after a certain event. Depression can happen after a certain event if you're more prone to it. Schizophrenia, my grandfather was diagnosed with schizophrenia. That doesn't mean that I'm going to be born with schizophrenia, but that means if I don't manage my stress, that means the gene that I have in my mind may be turned on if I don't manage my stress and my anxiety and my depression to where now I may be diagnosed with schizophrenia as well if those symptoms kick in.
Yeah, there was a question from a youngster. What is schizophrenia?
So schizophrenia is one of the more chronic mental health disorders. So that's when individuals hear voices, they see things, they feel like people are coming after them. It's just when they're not to the normal world, they're not thinking straight and they're not acting straight. But to them, they're in a whole different what's the word I'm looking for? A whole different
Just reality or world
yeah,
or
reality, a whole different reality to where they
yeah.
just are coming after them. They're hearing voices. These voices are telling them to do certain things. So it's definitely one on the more chronic side of mental health disorders.
Awesome. Thank you. If you guys see a question that you like, make sure you thumbs up it because I just go from the top down in terms of the number of thumbs up. This is an interesting question from Alexis. How do we find coping mechanisms when our old ones don't work? Right. So let's say I used to do one thing. She says, for example, play piano, but it doesn't, but it makes me stressed now because I have a recital soon. So is there, I mean, I guess the answer is find a new one. Yeah.
And so that's the thing. So when I work with athletes, I try to create like a list of 5 to 10 because that definitely happens. For example, one of my stress relievers is running. If it's raining or if it's snowing, it's too cold outside, I can't go run. So like I mentioned, I'm located here in New Jersey, and during the winter it gets freezing over here, like 5 degrees. So in that moment, I can't use that technique to relieve stress. So the best option is just to have as many as possible. For example, even when I was getting ready to run for the 10 mile race I had last month, I started to feel a little anxious. So when I was running, I started to notice like, all right, my body's starting to hurt a little bit more. So I need to take a break from that. So in that moment, after I did that, when I had to use a different coping skill, I had to just, not really look at my list, but I had a list in my mind. I just wanted something else, got a massage, or I did, just talk to somebody, whatever the case may be, so it's important to have a list because sometimes we may have we might have a coping skill that we can't use in the moment, or like you mentioned, it might just bring more stress because that's what we're working towards.
Love it. Awesome. Great tips there. So get a list, make a list. Um, Tiffany says, how about spending too many hours in front of the computer watching stuff? I think that was in regards to when we were talking about the different stressors. And you said, what are stressors that puts them in the chat? That could be one, right? Too much screen time.
A screen, like, are we talking about just like watching random videos or what screen
I don't
time is?
know. Just says how too many hours in front of the computer watching stuff.
Okay, so I'm gonna assume that they're either talking about just like watching too many like highlights, of other athletes. But yeah, that definitely can add to stress. Depending on why you're watching it and what you're doing. As far as so if you're comparing yourself to the athletes on the screen, that can definitely add to a large amount of stress. But I always try to tell people to limit their screen time as much as possible. Like on my phone, I have an app to where it locks my social media if I'm on there more than 20 minutes a day. Because if not, sometimes I might just get caught scrolling on it. So I definitely would say limit your screen time as much as possible.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. Tracy's got a question. What suggestions do you have for dealing with post-season depression? Post-season depression. So after the season is over and you're not with your team anymore and you're not getting those endorphins from playing.
That's a great question. Number
Yeah.
one, and I don't want to sound biased. Number one is I would definitely say if you notice that's happening after every season, you definitely probably should try to work with an individual therapist or it's a sports psychologist, to figure out what's going on. Because that question is much more deep than me just giving out skills and giving out different coping mechanisms. Because it could be something triggering triggering that depressive state. So I would
Mhm.
definitely say work with a specialist or work with somebody when it comes to that to figure out what's happening at the court. What's happening, what's causing you, what's that trigger, what's triggering you to need this sport, and why can't you find it in any other areas of life? And then figure out
Mhm.
and kind of rebuild that from the core up. Um, and that's the biggest thing. As far as the questions coming in, I don't want to answer too many questions as far as like how do I deal with this disorder because it's much more deeper than just a 30-second response.
Right.
So that's always going to start off by trying to find a mental health professional, either a therapist, sports psychologist, a psychiatrist, and just see, if you can get to the core of the issue and then rebuild that up.
Right. Because you don't know their life, right? You don't, I mean, it's very hard to give generic advice to questions like these because you don't know their background, their experiences, how they think, where they're at mentally, all the stuff, right?
Yeah, that's why I try to stay away from it because when I'm dealing with a client that comes in and they're struggling with depression, that first day we're not talking about it. It takes probably about like 3 or 4 sessions for me to learn their
Mm.
mental makeup and understand what they're going back home to, what's going on, and then we can start figuring stuff out. So it takes a while for me to get down to the core, and then we can start implementing certain things.
Yeah, love it. Willis is a young goalie, super young. How do you hold your emotions and not try to show them after you let in a goal, after you give up a goal?
So once again, it kind of depends on the individual, but so he asks, how do you hold it? How do you not show your emotions, or how do you show your emotions?
The way the question is worded, and you can feel free to correct, you know, this mindset, but it's how do you hold your emotions in? I'm assuming. How do you hold your emotions and trying not to show them after you let in a goal?
So that's a tough question. Because I'm the one to tell you to not hold it in. I'm the one to tell you it's okay to feel what you feel and let it out, but just learn how to let it out. Not
Mm.
screaming, not throwing your stick, not hitting somebody. It's okay to feel how you feel. Like if you're upset, feel that way, right? But it's just about how you express that emotion. If you're upset, instead of screaming and yelling, take some deep breaths. If you're upset and you feel like screaming and you feel like yelling, find a way just to kind of like hit that mental reset. So it's a little bit more complex than just like, throwing it out there as well. But I would definitely say, let your emotions come out, but just learn how to filter it and express it in a healthy manner compared to like screaming, yelling, throwing your stick, or, having a tantrum.
Yeah. That's such a great point because the default, I think, when you get mad or when you feel frustration or embarrassment or like one of these common feelings when a goalie gives up a goal is to slam the stick, is to throw the palms up, is to have some big gesture, and that really hurts the team. I feel like so we're not saying you don't suppress it, right? Because it's real, you feel it, but we're just
Exactly.
going to learn a different way to feel it, right? Maybe it's the deep breath. Maybe I say something positive to myself. Maybe like I focus on the ball for a little bit. I know one goalie to refocus would shoot up some water and just watch one drop fall all the way to the ground, right? So he's dealing with his emotions. It's not like he's holding them in. He's just found a positive way to deal with it, right?
Exactly. Like I have an athlete to where when he needs to hit that mental reset, he finds somewhere in the stadium. And let's say, for example, I can't even think. Let's say it's just somewhere in the stands, and when he looks at that, he just kind of focuses on that moment, and he hits that reset button. He's not thinking about the goal he just let up. He's not thinking about the mistake he just made. But when he looks there, it's him hitting that mental reset, and then when he comes back to the game, he's back in it. So sometimes we just gotta hit that reset, and then just hit that restart button and just jump right back into it.
Yeah. Willis, does that make sense? Does that make sense? How do we deal with the stress of tryouts? Is a question from Abigail.
Stress. Okay. So that's kind of more I feel like a little bit of anxiety when it comes to tryouts. Once again, you have to understand that when you get to the tryout, there's nothing more you can do to prepare for that moment. Everything you did was the week prior to that, the month prior to that, what all the training sessions you did. So all the preparation has been done prior to that tryout. So I would say in a moment like that, when you say stress, I'm going to kind of relate that to anxiety a little bit. You're feeling anxious. So I would just tell the client, number one, the expectations, reframe and revisit your expectations for the tryout. Set smart goals, set goals that are reachable. So like, for example, for this tryout, I'm going to focus on only things that I can control. I'm going to focus on working hard. I'm going to focus on the effort that I put in. I'm going to focus on giving 120%. I'm only going to focus on what I can control. I'm not going to focus on the outcome. I'm not going to focus on what the coaches says or how the coaches are going to view me. I'm just going to focus on what I can do and what I can control. So it'll be a lot of reframing when it comes to anxiety, but that's where I would start at for a quick answer when it comes to tryouts.
Awesome. Well, Coach, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge. I know we got tons of questions we didn't get to, but there's the contact info. If you guys really, you have a question and you're like, man, I can't believe we didn't get to that one, definitely reach out. Elite_mental_wellness is the link on Instagram. I think David threw it in the chat. If you could do that one more time so folks can tag you if you do the selfie to enter the giveaways, and then also give Coach a follow. Coach, some final last words?
Number one, thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for everybody who stayed on the entire time. Like I mentioned before, this information might be for you, or it might be for a teammate that you have, or it might be for yourself down the line. So definitely just, observe the information that I shared. Do research, read articles, read books when it comes to anxiety, depression. And I want you guys to make sure that you don't use this session as a form of therapy. Today was just about giving information. Now what's important is what you do with that information. If you notice that something is off, you notice that something is wrong, don't just continue to live that like it's the new norm. Find somebody to talk to, find somebody to work with to figure out how you can get back on track. So I definitely will leave you guys off with that, and just want to say thank you again for having me and let me be in a part of this event.
Absolutely. Pleasure, Coach. We'll talk to you soon. Everyone, we'll see you in an hour. We got Liam Entenman and Molly LaLiberty. Take care.
All right, perfect. Have a good one.